what I hope is that the reader, that you take a journey with her that has genuine truthfulness and verisimilitude to her experience.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Carol Fitzgerald from readinggroupguides.com, a website from the Book Report Network, and I am the host of the Book Reporter Talks To video podcast series. Welcome to Bookaccino Live Book Group tonight, where our guest is Miranda Cowley Heller, and we are going to be discussing her debut novel, The Paper Palace, which was an instant New York Times #1 bestseller, a Reese Witherspoon Book Club selection, a B&N Book Club pick, and a Book Reporter Bets On selection. So the format for tonight is going to be as follows, because I don't know how many of you have attended our events before. Let me start by noting that we are going to assume that you have read the book. This is that kind of a book club, because we are going to talk spoilers. We are going to talk what happens in the book towards the end, in the middle. So just know that if you haven't finished reading it, you want to click out at any time, we're not going to hold it against you. I'm going to begin with a discussion with Miranda, and then a couple members of the audience will be joining us live to share their questions. And then we're going to take questions from the audience that you should drop into the Q&A area below. So in the chat, write what your book club is reading right now. In the Q&A, write the questions so that Austin doesn't have to run around and look for them later on, because he is going to be our voice of God asking questions from the audience. Before I bring Miranda onto the stage, we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to post a poll question about the ending of The Paper Palace, which we know everyone has an opinion on. So we're going to put up a poll, and you're going to vote here what you think happened at the end before we bring Miranda out. And we're going to share the poll results later this evening. So Austin is going to pop the poll up onto the screen, and we will give you a couple of moments to answer what you think happened. I think the poll is coming, Austin. This is something new. We've never tried it before. It's a very special book. We figured this was the time to do it. So let's just see. Is everybody seeing it? Not me?
Yes, quite a lot of people are already answering.
Oh, they're seeing it a different way. I thought it was going to come up on the screen. Okay. All right. So you let me know when you think people have stopped voting, and then I'll bring Miranda up on the stage. Or can I do that anyway?
Yeah, let's bring Miranda.
Oh, without housekeeping behind us, let's welcome Miranda to the stage. So Miranda, come on. It's good to see you.
I'm coming. Hi.
There you are.
Great
Hi.
Hi,
The
Carol.
magic of the button. So good to see you again.
Lovely to see you again. I'm utterly thrilled to be here.
Yeah, we had such a good time last time.
We did.
So, we did. We just chatted and chatted and chatted about the book. And that's the reason I was so happy to bring you back to talk to everybody, because this is one of those books I've answered so many emails about. People have told me what their group has done. I know what my group has done. And it's just been very, very interesting to see people's reactions, what they take away from it. And a lot of people have just loved it. So this is really, really wonderful. Every book we know begins of a kernel of an idea. Like there's something like way back at the beginning. What was it for The Paper Palace that was your start that sat you down and go, wait, I think I can do this?
Wow, good question. I don't really know whether I had the kernel of an idea of place, that the landscape was going to be very central to whatever I was going to write. So that was one piece of it. As a matter of fact, I started writing at the same time about 4 different things, and all set in the same place, all completely different. One was even a YA novel, I think. This was a while back. The kernel really was about the life you live in your head versus the life you actually live, and somewhat inspired by a John Lennon quote that I was obsessed with as a teenager, which is life is what happens when you're making other plans. And I wanted to explore that idea. And that's where the sort of kernel came, which was a woman who has to make a decision between the life in her head, the sort of imagined life she thought she would have, in this case with Jonas, and then the life she's actually led, over the 50 years. And so that was the notion of one woman's life told in 24 hours and then told over 50 years. And a clock that ticks forward and years that tick forward until they meet the night before she steps out into the dark with him. So that was the one big idea I had. But beyond that, it just kind of came.
It came. Well, setting and place are so well drawn in the book. So let's go, because you did have setting as such a big core part of what was going on. And I feel like it's a love letter to a special place in a lot of ways, because you write so beautifully about it. So tell us about the setting, why you chose it, because you just write beautifully about it. It's someplace I want to go and see.
Well, I can't let you go and see it or my family would kill me, but yes. No, they were like, make sure you don't tell anybody where this actually is. It's very close to the place I was raised in every summer of my life, and where I actually got married on the edge of that pond, or a similar pond, because it's different proportions and so on and so forth. But that landscape, the backwoods of the Cape, is part of my being. You know, I grew up there. We spent every summer there. My parents are artists, and so they took us out of school, and we were there for the whole summer. And it's very rough landscape, very wild, and only dirt roads, and that sort of fork and fork and fork. I mean, you cannot find your way in or out, by the way, you know, or pre-GPS anyway, unless you know the sort of secret language of that place, which made it very, very particular and special, because we were sort of packs of kids running around, going to the ocean, swimming in the ponds. There's 8 or 10 ponds in the area. You could just walk to them, and old, you know, bee hives and weird things, you know, that as kids we'd come across a beautiful old tree house that somebody that was probably my mother's mother had played on. You know, it has this sort of ancient history. So in any case, I was so interested in the indelibility of place and how it affected me and how it would affect a character like Elle, and the interaction between the landscape and her interior landscape and the exterior landscape kind of interact, so that throughout the novel there's a synchronicity. When she's in the worst part of a storm internally, there's the huge storm outside, without being too sort of heavy-handed about it. But that's kind of what evolved without me really thinking about it. But you know, she's kind of part of it, and it's part of her. So.
And it's also the place that she saw Jonas for the first time. So he is a very integral part of this place to her as well. She remembers where she met him. She remembers what happened when all these kinds of things. So there's this backstory that we hear as the book is going on. But at the beginning, it's like, okay, we're in this beautiful place. We're there.
Right, exactly. And that place has, as we learn, it has an incredible lyricism as well as incredible trauma. And so it's the dark places and the light places combined that are also really important to who she is as a character. So that, and I think also there's a lot of, she swims a lot. There's a lot of water, fresh water, you know, salt ocean water, bay, you know, and so on. And even in England, the ponds. And there's something about that really interested me too as an idea. Not just as a cleansing, but as a kind of being in over your head, and a drowning, and a baptism, and just so many sort of things that are part of who she is as a character.
Water metaphors, lots of water metaphors of what she's going through in her life. But then we've got this opener, like, you know, okay, we've got an opener and closer on this book that are like, whoa, okay. Let's start with the opener. So we're on page 3, and Elle decides that she is, yes, going to have sex with Jonas, her childhood friend. She walks out of a dinner party. This is, you know, what ends up happening. And was that the opener right away? Did you know you wanted sort of, I think I told you last time, I thought it was like a cold open. It's like, we're there, folks. We're right into the story, right into the book.
Right. Well, it's funny because, you know, I say in the acknowledgements, or I acknowledge something my grandfather, who was a writer editor and literary critic, had said to me when I asked him what determined a good novel from his point of view, and he was Faulkner's editor at Kerouac, so he had pretty good taste. And he said, every novel has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but the end has to be foreshadowed in the beginning. And I actually started exactly there. I started at the end, and then I moved backward from there and forward in time. It's kind of a cold open in that sense, I agree. What I wanted to set up was, because she also says very clearly, this is the first time this has happened. This is somebody she's known her entire life, who you learn has been in love with on some level her entire life. And this has never happened before. Mm-hmm. So why last night? And I think although it's not heavy-handed and articulated in that way, there's a kind of an emotional mystery that starts from the beginning. Why last night? And you're going to find that out by the time you get to obviously the very end of the book. You finally learn why it finally happened. And so I think it's not like a whodunit, but there's a sort of a why done it that has this energy, and I really liked that idea as well. So
and the book is also written in the first person, so there's this command. There's like a command that happens with the first person that doesn't happen with second and third quite the same way. Was that always the voice, or did that edit come along the way? Were you always like, I'm there?
Always the voice was first person. It had to be first person because it's so the past is not flashbacks. It's told in real time from her point of view, from a point of view of a child or a teenager or a woman in her late 20s or early 30s and so on. And so it's so intrinsic to character. It had to be told from that point of view for me, in order for Elle to rather for the reader to, let me just stop myself for a second. So I think a lot of readers come into it at the very beginning, as you just mentioned, and think, oh, what a horrible person, right? She's just done this terrible thing and we're going to hate her because, her wonderful husband. And what I hope is that the reader, that you take a journey with her that has genuine truthfulness and verisimilitude to her experience. And the only way to put everybody into her experience is to put it literally into her eyes and voice. And so that was very, very critical to me, that you'd understand that the verisimilitude of character would be there through point of view, and very specifically her own point of view, and seeing how her character changes because of the things that happen to her, because of the choices she makes, and how her voice shifts and a little bit over time, and exactly. So,
and you see where she questions herself. You see where she wonders, did I do this? Wait, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? So we're really in her head the whole time of, it's not just this linear path of, oh, I know where I'm going to go. It's these little things that happen along the way, these little tributaries. And then she comes back, and where does she go from there? And she's on a really strong path, but then where does that path go?
Right. And by the way, I love that you just said the tributary thing, because it made me think of what I was describing about I've never thought about this before, but getting in and out of the woods on those roads that just fork and fork and fork again. And if you don't know your way, you get lost. And I think that's, that's actually a really good way of thinking about it, because her life just forks and forks and forks with every choice she makes. And, she's lost for a while and, but finds her way out. And I think, although it's certainly not I think choices, big and small, are such an important theme, idea here that I wanted to explore as well. The smallest choice is as, manifest as enormously in one's life as the hugest choices. There's,
Well, it's actually the one big why that she's carrying, and what that why means. It was a small choice. It wasn't a big decision on what to do. It was just do this, and then all of a sudden the person will die. Like, we can talk about it, guys. We all read the book. So all of a sudden, just this one moment where they look at each other, they decide what to do. It's a very subtle action that changes the whole trajectory of what's going on in their lives. and it puts a secret that binds the two of them together. So and then from there, it becomes a lie of what's gone on. So am I right that it's like, it's a little thing. It's just a little
Yeah.
thing. Just don't grab that. Just don't grab the rope. Just don't do this,
And actually, yeah, exactly. There's no premeditation, of course. And he puts his hand on hers and then she just lets it stay there. And it's the tiniest gesture, exactly, that changes both of their lives, binds the two of them together, as you said, but also forces them apart. And it's the reason, it's the lie that determines and sort of inevitably comes to define her relationships with both Peter and Jonas, because the problems with Peter and her, the distance is the lie, and the problem with Jonas is also the lie that they carry together. So for both reasons, for opposite reasons in both relationships, that lie is the determining factor that has, really, her whole life ends up, pivoting on that moment, that one little gesture. Yeah.
And then what ends up happening, though, we've got the book that's set in 4 different parts. It's Elle, Jonas, Peter, and this summer. Was that done early in the game or later on during the editing? Because you've got, definitive ways that you're sitting and looking at this whole story at the same time.
It was done later. It was already in different books, but then when I kind of went back, the books themselves didn't shift. But when I went back into a kind of a rewriting process when it was finished, and felt that I wanted to focus a little bit more on each character, each section, then I realized that that's what I wanted to do, was make it where you really get to know each of these characters.
Yeah, and really can get into what's going on. I think that many, perhaps most women in their 40s and 50s go through a time where they think what might have been, what is, what happened, what didn't, what road did I take, what didn't I do? And I feel like Elle's having this moment where she's sitting in that very same seat. And I think if people are honest with themselves, it does happen in their lives. And as a result, she's trying to figure out what makes her happy in her life at this point. She's at a point where there's going to be a lot of years in front of her. There were a lot of years behind her. What's going to happen going forward? And she wants to be in control of it. Is that some of where she is?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think that what evolves is that you understand both choices, and so you realize she's struggling between 2 choices that are equally powerful, and there's no bad choice, so that means there's no good choice. And I do think that we are all at some point in our lives faced with something similar, where you have to make a choice between 2 things and your life depends on it, but how do you know which way to go? And you don't necessarily. And in the end of the day, I think often you just jump in one direction or another for almost not because of column A and column B, right? And I think what really intrigued me, I feel like I know that experience. I think not the actual affair-y stuff, but just the thing of like literally looking at your life and saying, can I live my life, with regrets? Do I want to, I also think the pandemic has really sharpened the focus of this question for so many people, men as, all of us, which is that a deepened, horribly saddened, deepened sense of our mortality. It's been, in so many ways right there on the edge. And I think a lot of people are saying, who do I want to be in the end? Who do I want to be true to? What parts of myself do I want to be true to? And then can I live for myself? Can I make that kind of a choice? There's the societal piece of it. There's the personal piece. There's so many different pieces. And at the end of the day, as you say, is it allowed to come down to happiness?
Not quite sure. I remember I had a great job. I had a great job at Condé Nast. I had an unlimited expense account, car service, all this stuff, corner office, great salary. I wasn't happy. And all of a sudden I sat there and I said, I could be doing this probably till I'm 50, because that's probably when they'll kick me out. or I could go now and figure out what to do. And there are those choices that come in the road, and you can either stay doing one thing and then say later, why did I do this? Because it's comforting. Believe me, that was a lot simpler. That was safe. And you go to unsafe. And I feel like she's at that place where I go from safe to unsafe, or what is safe and what isn't for me right now.
Right, exactly. I mean, does it mean she's going to have everything she never had, or does it mean she's going to lose everything she has? And there's a horrible balance between those two things.
Right.
And I think that's just, for me, it's the whole novel in a way is about raising these questions, but they don't have an answer. So I'm not really interested in answering them, but I'm very interested in examining them. Because I also think in terms of choices, and I think we talked about this a little, it's not just the choices you make, it's the choices you inherit from your grandparents to your parents. Every generation inherits their choices down, even their love affairs, the choices they make. Every single one of those choices affects their children, the next generation. And so there's this sort of trickle down economics, emotional economics, let's say, that you inherit behaviors from the choices of others. And I think that's also really very relevant in the case of Elle, given what her mother went through, given what her grandmother Nanette went through, and how each of them responded differently, partly to do with the time, Nanette's in the world where women aren't working, she's entirely dependent, and as are her children, on the man she's with. She can't just up and leave him. It's almost sort of a Jane Austen-esque scenario that we read about. It's not a nice choice to slap her daughter across the face, but in that moment, it's a kind of, it's a live or die thing for her as well. And then had she chosen differently, who would Wallace be? And, and if what had happened to Wallace hadn't happened, would she have been a different woman? And then what happens with Elle, would she have been able to go to her mother in a different way? Maybe Wallace wouldn't be quite so sort of guarded and emotionally guarded. And so on. And it's, and that is something that just really, I think, is critical in all of our lives, actually, right? The way those things happen. And also divorce was a big piece of it. Everybody obviously experiences that very differently. And I come from a family of divorce. And so to me, there was a little bit of a Grimm's fairy tale aspect to Elle and Anna going on that journey, on those little train rides together. The wicked stepmothers. Of course, there's many lovely stepmothers in the world, but that was again about how their mother's choice and their father's choice again affect them as little children. But then you see how what happens to Elle makes Anna such a different character to Elle. Anna's a warrior, Elle's an observer. Elle has a hesitancy about her.
Yes, that holding back kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I do love Wallace as a character, and I get the feeling that you did too. So was she really fun to write? Because she's just got, it's my way or the highway. We're going to eat this food. We're going to eat these crackers. This is the way we do it.
Wallace, I love Wallace, and I loved writing Wallace. And I don't really know where Wallace came from. She's an amalgam of different people. There was something about, kept thinking about the Marx Brothers, a little bit in her character, but she's just so delightfully horrible and rude. But at the end of the day, you realize, there's a huge mother-daughter arc, of course, throughout the novel, and she's really the most important person at the very end of the novel, the last scene of them together, where Elle, tells her mother everything. The way Wallace responds to that is just so revealing. I think about both of them, and very beautiful, really, in the end. So, I loved that relationship, but also Wallace just makes me laugh.
Yeah. Like this is the way we're going to do things. Everything's falling apart around us, but let's set a beautiful table. Everything's going to not go well, but we're going to have this dinner. This is what we're going to do. And let's just keep, writing things back and forth,
And also just sort of, oh, don't be ridiculous. Divorce is good for children. stop. There's just, she just is so opinionated.
You get to meet more
Well
people.
done.
Just
Yeah.
think you'll get to meet more people. You'll see more people during the week. You'll eat different food. It's not a problem, but it's, yeah, I love the moving back and forth to see how the plot rolled together. And it really is because you're inside her head in different places and you're thinking of her as younger, and you have to write this character really growing up at the same time, coming into her own. She's a child, then she gets older, and then all the decisions she makes, some of which are good, some of which are bad. And how do we judge what's good and bad, really? But you have her through the years, that 24 hours in the 50 years. It was such a great way to do it. It's funny because I've been watching This Is Us, every season, and they do that backstory all the time. They're bringing you back and then they're bringing you forward. And it's really been kind of brilliant. It's been kind of like a book because you're doing that, same kind of back and forth thing. And I was saying there, and I was like, it's so neat because there's 24 hours. We know the clock is ticking, but at the same time, we're having this much bigger story of what's going on. Did you always know that that was the way you wanted to do it, with the clock ticking at the same time? Lots of emotion going.
Yeah, I think I did. I think the difficult part was the balance between the two, because there's an operatic quality in a weird way to the life, which makes sense, and a kind of obviously much more simple but equally passionate 24 hours, and but they're tonally very, very different. And so I knew that in the building of the moments of her life, I wanted them, each one, to evolve into the next. So I couldn't determine anything in advance. I had no sense of what would happen next until I knew what had happened first, as it were, which was quite fun because it's just sort of discovering moments and putting them together to make sense of a life. But I didn't ever sort of know, even before I started writing anything, I never had an idea of what it was going to be about at all.
So you're doing dishes going, she's going to go here tomorrow, she's going to do this, that. It was just sit down and write.
Yeah.
So you spend a lot of time writing poetry. And I'm thinking that is the same way you write poetry. You don't sit there and say, oh, let me write this line down, we'll do more with it tomorrow. I mean, it usually doesn't happen like that.
Right.
But I'm thinking that, did the poetry influence your prose writing because it was that same kind of feeling of writing lyrically?
Absolutely. I always thought I was a novelist, in my 20s, even without writing a novel. But I did try, and I was terrible, I think, because it was very, very in my head, very tight, and I could always write well, but that's nothing to do with creating people and their lives, really. And it wasn't, and when I got back to writing a lot of poetry again, I found my way to the love of the blank page, which we're sort of talking about. And with poetry, you just let everything go, and it comes out almost from a sort of back, I don't know, I always think sort of the lizard brain, or a dreamscape, a kind of otherworldly, surreal process that you don't control. And that, when I was able to see that poetry is fiction and fiction is poetry, and that I could write from that place, write character without premeditation, without, story without premeditation, but to simply let it flow, follow the characters instead of determining the characters, instead of determining their actions. And that made me, suddenly broke a dam for me, because all my sort of self-criticism and all my junk, crap, whatever, finally I was like, oh, right, I could put that aside and just follow these people. And I think one of the big differences is just, the notion of digging intentionally for something versus unearthing things by chance. And that's what poetry seems to me much more about. And I definitely brought that to the book, and I wouldn't have been able to write it otherwise.
And that's so interesting, because it does feel that way. It feels that just, oh, these are just words coming down, but you feel like you are with Elle the whole time. You feel like you really get to know her and you're traveling with her, because you do such a good job of making her so real to us, making her plight of what she's really trying to go through, her whole life coming back at her. It's so interesting. So also the Paper Palace is being developed as a mini series for HBO. And when we left off last time, you were working on adapting it, which is a whole other kind of writing. How's that going?
It's going, television is, as I know from the other side of the fence, a very, very slow process. But it's sort of moving ahead apace, and we'll see. But in terms of my experience of the writing, it's hard to not to write dialogue or to any of that. I know these characters, but it's a translation into something else. You can't just pick it up and put it there. So what's quite fun is having to find new ways to express the same pieces. It's almost just sort of like putting them into a different instrument, transposing. And that's been really challenging, but really fun. And because it's very important to me to keep the truth as well of the book. I don't want to, certain things that are internal in a book, they're not going to translate, of course, they're not going to be externalized on screen in the same way. So that's been fun, hard, but good.
It's different, but you can also sit there and go, she went to a lake. You don't have to describe it. It's just, she went to a lake. She went to a pond. There was this when she got there, and then let them figure it out. Their whole parts, you guys figure out. I got to do my part, but you figure out the rest of that,
That would be, if you could do it that way, it would be great, actually.
Get down the water, move 4 feet. This is what we're going to do. I do want, before we get into questions from our audience, I want to talk about the cover, because this is such a beautiful cover, and I want you to just share where the picture behind this cover came from.
Yeah, isn't it beautiful? I love it. So that is a detail of a painting of my stepfather's, Paul Resica, who's a fairly well-known American painter. He's 93 years old, but we found this, I didn't find this. This was a painting amazingly found by the art director who was trolling the internet for an image and found this image from an old sale at Sotheby's. And nobody had any idea where the painting was. And it took a very, very long time to find an original image and so on. But it's in fact the place in the book, in my mind, where Elle first meets Jonas. And the point that's sticking out is where he's waiting for the snapping turtle. So when this painting surfaced, I just couldn't believe it, that it was of that spot and that they wanted to use it, right? Because I wasn't me suggesting it.
Right.
And he's he's painted so much on the Cape, and so beautifully. So I'm really, really lucky that he has kind of,
immortalized
made that landscape permanent for me. But yeah.
Immortalized on your book. There you go. It's like, how did you contribute? Well, let me just tell you, the family was involved. It was a family project, but I didn't pick the person. This is something the art director found, which is even crazier. Absolutely crazy.
That was great. Yeah.
So we're going to go to audience questions in a little bit. So everybody in the audience, please drop your questions into the Q&A down below, because we are going to go to your questions later. Austin is going to do this. And right now we have a couple of readers that are going to join us. First up is Debbie Moore. She's a longtime reader of the site. And Debbie is going to ask her question.
Hi, Miranda. I loved your book. And you had such a wonderful setting and such wonderful characters in your book that I really appreciated, especially coming from New England. But when you wrote the book, were there certain thoughts or themes that you wanted to convey to your audience? For example, the messiness of families or the problems that secrets can cause. Did you have some major themes that you were thinking about as you were writing?
I love that question, because there are so many themes that are really important that came out in the writing, but I didn't sit down with themes. I think most writers probably don't. If you try to sit down with an idea and then execute it, it's not going to be the same at all. But as it moved forward, and as she took on a life of her own, and I sort of followed her, I thought, oh, this is so interesting. Oh, that's so interesting. But it wasn't sort of me being a director. When I got to the end of the first draft, and I went back and kind of finally read it and sat with it, there were a few really big ideas that came out that I loved, particularly about the female characters, about sisters, the relationship between Elle and Anna, I went back and really, and sort of to what I was saying earlier about the inherited choices, I wanted to see how that worked and how choices work differently on two girls who inherit the exact same choices from their parents, right? But whose lives are different, and how that changes them as characters, brings them closer together or further apart. So that was something I went back and really wanted to enrich and explore. I added a lot more of Elle and Anna once that idea clarified itself for me, for instance. But I didn't start with sort of, I'm going to follow this idea.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you for the question.
So before our next questioner comes up, the panelist comes up, Nancy Bader has actually hosted 2 book clubs talking about the Paper Palace, and she started to do another one in early May. And each group, she starts with asking the group to close their eyes and vote on who Elle ended up with. And we decided to do the same thing in our poll that we asked earlier this evening. So Austin, can you give us the results now? And can you read the question and what the answers were? The possible answers were.
So the first question is, at the end of the book, who did you think Elle decided to be with? Jonas, Peter, or we wrote something else as in something else happened. And the second question was, what did you think actually happened at the end of the book? And Elle ends up with Jonas, Elle ends up with Peter, or other.
And the results are?
The results are, I think, if you'd like to see them, everybody should be able to click on polls. There's a button, but I can speak them out loud as well.
I don't see them, yeah.
So for the first question, 53% of people thought she would end up with Jonas. 34% thought she would end up with Peter, and 13% thought something else would happen. And for the second question, what did you think actually happened? It's pretty similar, 52%, 32%, and 15% thought something strange would happen.
Okay, so the people who thought something else would happen, can you write in, Austin, do you want it in the chat or the Q&A? Which would be easier for you? Because I'd love to hear what the answer is on that.
Why don't people add it to the chat?
Add it to the chat. Okay, so if you could add to the chat, if you didn't think it was Jonas or Peter, what you think happened. Because this is really interesting. When we did it with our group, 2 of us thought Jonas, everyone else thought Peter, and one woman was convinced that Elle killed herself. She was convinced, okay? So I'm gonna bring on Nancy because Nancy was the one who actually inspired this question, Nancy Bader, who's from South Carolina.
Okay, I loved the book.
I can't see you, Nancy. Oh,
Okay, there we go.
Hi,
All
Nancy.
right. I loved the book. And yes, we did it with 2 book clubs. And I thought the ending was pretty clear, but I was surprised because out of 20 people, 10 people said Jonas, 6 said Peter, 2 thought she committed suicide. 1 thought that she stayed married to Peter, but continued to have an affair with Jonas. And 1 couldn't decide, so just left her floating around in the water, and the book ended. So here's my question or questions. Did you think, because you have said in interviews I've read and watched that you thought the ending was pretty clear, especially the 1 paragraph that you referred to with taking off the ring. Did you think that there would be such mixed reaction, and that did you think that some readers would envision her committing suicide? And based on that, have you had any second thoughts about the ending? Would you change anything? Would you make the choice clearer or even change the choice?
Wow. Well,
Sorry.
On the spot, Miranda.
No,
Sorry
it's
about
good.
that.
It's good. It's great. This has been something that's fascinated me because of course, and I have loved, because what it made me realize is that what was super clear to me, there's no question in my mind that I made the ending completely clear, right? Oops. Anyway, so I knew who she chose. I thought it was completely transparent. But what a couple of things I realized were that depending on how you read and where you emphasize words in your mind as you're reading, like with poetry and scansion, you could read it 2 different ways. And so it became that was really interesting to me. Also, that, and it's not entirely this way at all, but in general, younger readers thought it was Peter and older readers thought it was Jonas. And that really interested me too. And of course, I have a theory about that, which is that, younger female readers, in any case, not male in this conversation right this second, or maybe think that, marriage and children is like really romantic. Those of us who are a bit older are like Jonas, right? So I think there's a sort of, we bring our own lives into the end of the book, which that really surprised me. And that's been something I'm really grateful for, actually. As to whether or not I would change it, I would not, well, first of all, it wasn't up to me who she chose, literally. I didn't know who she was going to choose until this penultimate page of the novel, nor did I want to know, and nor would I have made the same choice. This was Elle. I mean, it's just Elle. And so it has to be, because the point is that it's a small gesture that changes everything. In this case, it's really I always think you make this choice, you say, I've decided to take the job in, I don't know, London instead of Paris or something, goodness knows, and then, you totally decided and you pack up your bags and everything's done 100%. And then you just suddenly realize, that you, I don't know what, you see a croissant or you vomit or so, I don't even know. And you're like, I don't want to go to France. The whole life changes, right? It's not over something. It's so often a sort of quick reaction, emotional thing that happens in life. So I really didn't want to choose until the very end for her to choose. And when I think for me, it's the hummingbirds, it's the little wing of the feather of a hummingbird that is on the step that is reminds her as she's stepping out of what she thought about the night before and about connective tissue, connectivity, soulmate, her soulmate in Jonas. So that's one little teensy trigger, let's say. I would I might change like 1 or 2 words, but I certainly wouldn't change anything more than that, because it is a tiny little thing that is going to explode. It's the sort of butterfly's wing metaphor, or it's a tiny little thing that's going to explode her entire life. And that's how her world has always worked. Her choices have been bad or good, but very last minute and often, right? And so I would not change the ending at all, but I might, if anything, I might add 1 or 2 extra words to clarify, but nothing more than that. So
yeah, it was funny because everybody in our group was talking about when she took her ring off. Did she always take her ring off when she swam? Like, there were little things we were doing, and then we reread the last 3 pages very closely. And in reading the last 3 pages very closely, some of the people had said, Peter moved towards Jonas, because they saw like a different way. But it's true, you could go either way as you're sitting and reading the book. And it's been so interesting. Nancy brought this up with her groups, voting like with their eyes closed. And it's just been interesting to see what people's reactions are, because you really think, oh, I completely see it the same way. And it's like exactly what you see in the whole book. Which eye are you looking through?
Exactly. And I've been shocked by it, but really fascinated. It's taught me a lot. And also, I'll tell you one thing it really means, why it's meaningful, is that when you're writing the book, when you're writing a novel, I mean, this is my first novel, of course, so this is my experience, but for me, it's mine. The characters are mine for the longest time. The minute it's out there in the world, it doesn't belong to me anymore. The story doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you, it belongs to readers. and who are going to bring their own imaginations, their own way of visualizing or seeing or perceiving. And that's what it should be, right?
Mhm.
That's how it hopefully will connect. And in a way, this whole dialogue around the ending was very affirming for me, because I went, oh, right, wow. What I always wanted, which was to kind of connect in that way, that's what's happened. People are making the story their own or translating it through their own lens. And, you know, and that's exactly how it should be, right? But it wasn't meant to be ambiguous. but it's actually sort of been this weird joy to, you know, although I think very irritating for some readers who think it's ambiguous and get really mad at me. I definitely get like quite a lot of, you know, I love the book, if only you hadn't, you know, you made a choice in the end. And I'm like, wait a minute.
I did. I made the choice.
Yeah.
It's just very interesting to have a book. Well, I mean, I read this book so quickly. I think I told you I kept falling asleep and getting up at 1 and 2 and not minding that I was up all night reading, because it would just completely captivate me right from the beginning. And a lot of people have said that they've just sat down and completely got immersed in the book. And I don't think that there's been a book all last year that I got as much mail about as this one, because people are constantly saying to me, what do you think happened? You know, want me to read it with my group? What do you think we should do? So Nancy spurred the question. Austin, what were some of the other answers? Can you pop on and tell us what some of the people wrote in the Q&A?
A few people said they thought she committed suicide. A few people, a few people said she like went from Peter and like switched sides. Some people said she kind of walked away and, you know, figured out her life and chose neither. Quite a few people thought that.
That was something that we heard from people too, is they just thought she just moved on. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. I like ambiguous endings. This was very good, even though you thought you wrote clearly. I love it.
It's so funny because I hate ambiguous endings. It's just, I'm the kind of person who like really wants to know. I would be furious if this book had an ambiguous ending.
And look what I did. Look what I did.
I know.
Nancy, thank you so much for inspiring our question and for sharing your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I have to do it one more time.
Let me know the answer. I want to know. We'll put it in the newsletter.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Raquel Stabinsky-Lieb is going to join us now, and she's got 2 questions for you. There we go.
Hi, Miranda. I have to say first that I'm absolutely fascinated with your book, and I have 1,000 questions, but promised only 2. Only 2. Well, the first one is, I do not understand how Wallace's mother and Wallace herself were not able to see the abuse going all around them, especially Wallace, who had gone through this before, or maybe purposely she's not able to see it. How were they able to ignore these 2 women seeing their children being abused and not seeing it?
Right. Well, I think Elle was very, very good at hiding it, for one thing. It's very important to Elle, and she doesn't know about her mother's abuse. The shame she carries and self-blame and all of these pieces that are within her, her desire, her as a sort of, I think, child of a broken family, she's a caretaker. She's the person who wants to protect her father, protect her mother, as you see in certain scenes with her father and the grandmother being mean to him, or with Wallace when she hears her mother begging, you know, for sex, you know, when she's a little girl. She wants to protect them. She even has a desire to protect Conrad in a way, and that she feels she's the only strong one who can hold these things in. So in Wallace's defense, Ella's very, very careful to not let on anything. And I think that is, for Wallace, there is something about Wallace that makes Elle also feel that she needs to protect her marriage. She's seen her mother depressed. She's seen her happy, and her mom's so happy, and she doesn't want to ruin that or take that away from her mother either. And so I think she's a young girl making lots of sadly rather typical choices. I understand, and she just makes it very, very. I don't see how Wallace would have known, but also her experience was actually a very different experience. She's a much younger child, and she grows up again in a very different world. But it's interesting because I think it's amazing how blind people can be. In fact,
Well, during what I was reading, I wondered, because sometimes if you live in a family where this is done, and this is usually, if it happens in your family, it's okay, it happens again. This is what you're used to. It's okay. That's what I got out of it. And I was wondering how you felt about it.
Yeah, I don't think Wallace had any idea, and I don't think there's a use to it. I know what you were, of course, saying and referring to. I don't think that. I think Wallace is a narcissist, apart from anything else. And she just is obsessed with her husband. She's obsessed with Leo. She's obsessed with, that's who she is, so.
And my other question, which is more like a statement or an observation, was that both Jonas and Elle didn't seem to harbor any feelings of guilt about letting Conrad die. They just went on, let him die, and went on with their lives, except it seems like maybe way back inside of them, they regretted it a little bit. But once they found out that he had abused Rosemary, the sister, they feel like liberated. Yeah. They wanted to keep on with their lives, but what gave them seems so ethical wrong. I mean, what made them the police to take care of this into their own hands? What were they? The vigilantes to want to take their lives, and he's really, when they found out he had abused Rosemary, they felt free, right? They felt free, and they go on with their lives. They could be together. They did a good deed. They didn't really do a good deed. We are not vigilantes. We don't act upon the law. I mean, mind you, this Conrad was evil. He was a monster. I wanted to kill him myself before they decided to let him die. But I don't think I would have acted on it. I don't think you would have acted on it. But they just had a sense of entitlement that I know this in the book, and I think that has something to do with their decision. I really think that if they decide to stay together, they are not going to stay together.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. Elle has an enormous amount of regret and self-hatred, and she talks to Jonas about it quite a lot. It's why she hates herself, why she sees herself as a dirty person that is unlovable, that if Peter only knew what was inside her head and inside her heart, he couldn't possibly love her, and that she doesn't deserve forgiveness. So that's why she doesn't tell him, because she knows he would forgive her. And when she and Jonas meet in the diner, she says, I can't even look at you. I mean, I can't live with this at all. But it's a secret that they've kept. It wasn't something they planned. They were children, and they did a terrible, terrible thing in an instant without enough time to really think either way. And then it's done, and they just never see each other again until they run into each other there. And his feeling is different from hers, much more the way you described. He feels a heroism, that he feels like he saved her life from this terrible monster. She does not experience it that way at all. What she does experience at the very, very end is a sense of absolution, because she's carried such, anguish over this her entire life. It's so defined and limited her life since the moment it happened, that when she finds out that it wasn't just her, that he was a monster, that it wasn't situational, because she's always thought, well, I mean, yes, what he did was terrible, but he didn't kill anybody, you know, like I did. It was just this thing with me. And I think when she finds out the level of abuse, but also more to the point where Rosemary literally thanks her for saving her life. It gives, for the first time, Elle is able to see just a different side of it that enables her to feel free of some of this complete sense of shame. And I think that does, you know, enable them to look at each other for the first time, and that is why that happens that night. And then the rest, of course, follows on from there.
They were very likable, all of them. All the people, nobody was. They were all so likable.
Thank you.
I've heard other things.
Thank you so much, Raquel. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. We're going to go to reader questions now with our fabulous voice of God, Austin Rue. So Austin, do you have some questions for us?
It's actually funny that Raquel said that at the very end. One of our questions, our first question, is why are so many of the characters unlikable?
Didn't know that, right? You thought they were all nice people, right?
You know, I think that likable or unlikable is, of course, in the eye of the beholder and the reader. I think they are all flawed, as all human beings are, and as particular characters. I mean, of course, I find them, many of them, extremely likable, right? But also interesting and complex. And if there was one person, I mean, Peter's probably the least complex person in the book from that level, right? I mean, you know, he's just lovely, but he's got a very funny sense of humor, and he's got a wicked sense of humor, but there's nothing, he's an incredible father, he's a wonderful husband, he's everything he, you know, ought to be, and yet not enough. And that's, again, her point of view. It's funny, everybody loves or hates different characters. So all I can say is that what I wanted was that even the smallest characters have something memorable, something real enough about them that they are memorable and impactful in the story or in your experience as a reader.
Yeah, it makes me want to reread the book. All these questions tonight are making me want to go back and reread the book and say, oh, maybe I read too fast and I missed some little things.
The next question from an anonymous attendee: why so many F words? And I think you could open that even more as what do you think of books that have so much swearing in them?
Apparently, I think it's fine. Sorry if you read the book. I mean, I think this is how she talks. This is the era she grew up in, 60s and the 70s, and New York City in, you know, the 80s. And this is, you know, when I listen to how people speak of that generation, a lot of them speak this way, and she does. And there's a character choice in the sense that, you know, there's an irreverence there that she shares with Anna of language. But I think that comes very much out of the times in which they are raised.
The next question from Amy: you go back and forth in time, and I'm curious to know if you wrote the book in chronological order and reorganized chapters, or did you have a different method?
Yeah, chronologically, because I couldn't know what the next part of her life would be like until I knew what had come before. So yeah, absolutely chronologically. And it just sort of developed as it does in real life.
A question from Jill: was there something that you left out of the book that you wish were in it?
I always love that question. There was one chunk that I really loved toward the end of the book, where Becky comes back in, her friend who she, you know, is in the back of the car with, Dixon's daughter, her best friend from childhood. And I have to say, it was one of those things they talk about, killing your darlings. You know, I had to kill my darling because my darling and amazing editor, Sarah McGrath, said, you know, from this point on, we need to run our way home. right?
Mhm.
And you're stopping with this whole huge set piece with Becky, bringing Becky back. And, and she was right. I just happened to, I loved Becky as a character. And so then imagining her now as an adult and what she was doing in her life, she was a high school guidance counselor. But
I think
so that's one of them. Yeah.
Becky can appear in the HBO script. Becky can have a much bigger part in the HBO script, or you can do an Audible original of just the section about Becky. Here's the outtake. Here's the prequel. Here's the outtake.
I just loved it. I mean, the idea of this outrageous girl, ending up being the person to give sage wisdom and advice to young girls just made me laugh. So I developed this wonderful thing, I thought. But at the end of the day, there it is. Maybe it'll come into the script. Exactly. Good idea, actually. Thank you. Yeah, like that.
Here's a question from an anonymous attendee. Why is she so deceitful to her children and to the reader when she says, "I will never leave you"?
Mm.
I think she will never leave them, but that doesn't mean she won't leave her husband.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of the pain for her, is when she says Peter would never do that. He'd never come between us. He's the best man I know. He would not take my children away from me at all. So, in her mind, and also in that particular moment, in her mind, there's no question at all that it's Peter and that she's staying and she's going to this barbecue, and her mind is made up at that point. Absolutely made up. And then it changes, and then it changes again, and and changes again. And so in that moment, she's not lying. She's being very honest. But but that's the complexity of living life in real time, I suppose. And when you're writing a book as well. Yeah.
So we have one question left. If anybody else is thinking of a question, please jump into the Q&A and ask it now so that we can catch it. But this one is from Denise. What are you writing now, or are you working on anything else?
Hi, Denise. I've been writing the HBO script, and I went back to poetry actually, I feel like it's the way back to a new idea, and I'm poking at things, which is kind of how I get to things. So at the moment, I've been mostly focusing on poetry, and then the script, and and then I will know. It's funny, the poetry thing, we talked about earlier. I that's how I knew that this was what it was. There was something about it that clicked into place for me, just from writing about children, writing about marriages and poems about all sorts of different things. But yeah, I have the seed of an idea. That's all I'll say that I've been working toward.
Well, sometimes you do have to do that thing that gets you back to it. I remember hearing Paul Simon used to just throw a ball against the wall for a really long time, like hours, to try to break where you were to get to the next place, because you can't do it when you're in the head you are right now. So how do you do that? And it's being alone and just doing this for hours. And then it's like, I'm starting to see something coming. I think it was like so interesting.
Yeah.
I do have one thing that I was also thinking is I do love when Elle's sister's boyfriend gets the paper palace and he stays one night and says, "I'm hightailing it out of here. Like, that's it. I'm gone." And Wallace's reaction was like, "Why would you leave? This is nirvana. Like, why would you ever leave this place?" And I just thought that was like, he's going back to LA. This is not my scene. And you could just picture the people that just get to places and go, "This is not going to be for me. This is not good."
Absolutely correct. Yes. I see. Now talk about a character I didn't like. Yeah. He was
Exactly.
Susan jumped in with a question. I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you feel the success of this book added pressure in writing the next one?
If I were writing the next one, I would feel an enormous amount of added pressure. Yes. And I'm sure I will continue to. No, actually, to not be silly about it. I will not really get into the next book until I no longer care, or rather I will write my way past that. because that was a big thing for me with the first book, was getting out of my head, getting out of all the writers in my family who, you know, I might fail or don't want to be embarrassed. Or those voices have got to go. You can't write well. Voices in your head, and that doesn't mean I don't care, of course, not about the quality, but about the sort of it's speaking to everybody. You know, I want to write something wonderful again, of course, but not until it won't blossom until that piece of it is, you know, enough in the past, I think.
Yeah. Did you think there would be, like, were you surprised at what happened with this book? Were you surprised at, like, all the notes you got? I mean, it was like immediate. It was, I remember watching the BNN book club talk that you did as well. And that was people that had only read that book a couple of weeks ago, and they were so passionate about talking to you about it.
Yeah, I mean, I was completely surprised, of course, and unutterably thrilled.
Yeah.
And now it's coming out in all these other languages, which is
Right.
so interesting. I'm really getting a lot of feedback from people in Poland and in Germany and in Holland and Brazil and, you know, all of these different people, different, you know, readers from other cultures are reaching out to me, and that's been really interesting because that's all kind of happening right now. All of those foreign editions are starting to come out. So and getting that kind of take from a totally other cultural perspective is also very, very, very interesting, I think. Yeah.
Wow. Austin, we have it. We're done. We're going to go with questions.
I think so. Somebody else asked a question. I think it was kind of touched on. I'll ask it just in case. It's from Trish. Did you view or intentionally write Jonas to remain immature? He seemed a bit shallow and not completely likable. So of course, Trish said that she was hoping that she would stay with Peter. What are your thoughts on Jonas?
On whether Jonas was, whether I kept him purposefully
Yes. Yeah.
young. Well, no, but his importance in the book, his real place in the book is childhood and young adulthood and their 20s. You know, in the 24 hours, he is the lover who comes back here, but Peter is really the person in the existing person in her life at that point. So to the extent that that I was interested in the idea in your head as opposed to the life you've lived, as I started out saying, Jonas is, you know, the idea at that point. In the course of her lifetime, he's not an idea. He's a child and he grows up in it, but he's mostly seen through the lens of childhood, or, as I say, women, you know, people in their 20s and so on. And then by the time you get to the 24 hours, you know, that's how we know him. But that's also, you know, their relationship. That's the roots of them as well, you know. But that's an interesting question. Thanks.
It's been one of these fun nights because there's so many questions that I heard that I never even thought of. And I just love, like, when you sit and have a conversation with a much larger group of book club readers than you would normally get together with. Miranda, I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's meant a lot to me. It really did, because I wanted to talk to you again and bring it to our readers. So thank you so much.
I'm thrilled. I mean, really, and I love chatting with you. It's always very lively. Thank you so much for having me and for everybody coming on, and great, you know, questions and challenging questions. So it helps me about it too.
Thank you so very, very much. And you know what? We've got a quick reminder that if you haven't read The Paper Palace with your book group, if you tell us what your book group is reading on readinggroupguides.com, in the What's Your Book Group Reading contest, you can be entered to win one of 3 sets of the paperback, 12 copies of the paperback for your book club that Miranda's publisher has very kindly donated. So you go to What's Your Book Group Reading, tell us what you're reading now. And that's supposed to be this book. It's supposed to be the book you're really reading, unless you're really reading this book. We have to tell people that because they usually just spit back the book that whatever. So that's what you need to do. So, and we're also going to announce our next book club group event, which will be on Wednesday, May 25th at 8 p.m., where Janet Skelslin Charles will be our author guest, and we'll be discussing her novel, The Paris Library. So sign up will be available from Book Report and Reading Group Guides later this evening. And we're going to make this evening's talk available on YouTube and on our podcast later in the week. And to stay on top of what we're doing at Book Reporter and not ever miss anything of what we're doing, be sure to sign up for our newsletter. Miranda, thank you again for being such a special part of this evening. Now you're over and out. You can go back to doing what you were doing. And everyone else, have a lovely evening. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, everybody.
Good night now, everybody.